Archaeologists have discovered the body of a young girl, meticulously adorned on the summit of a volcano, and she does not belong to this world. Her body holds countless mysteries, and to solve them and find the cause of her death, we must travel back in time to the world she once belonged to. On March 16, 1999, an archaeological team discovered the girl on the summit of the Yuyayako volcano. She was a naturally freeze-dried mummy, found tightly wrapped in a blanket, reminiscent of how we carefully package a parcel before sending it, leaving no trace exposed. Her skin and clothes were completely hidden. She was found sitting cross-legged inside the package, with a serene expression, as if she were merely in a deep sleep. A small, ancient symbol was painted on her face with red paint, and her long hair was neatly braided into thin, delicate plaits, looking as if it had just been combed. Around the girl, dozens of small, exquisitely crafted yet strange objects were also found. Archaeologists have stated that she is the most perfectly preserved mummy in the world. She is at least 500 years old, but a problem has arisen. Let's consider where she was found. This is the longest mountain range in the world and the second highest peak of the Andes. It is also the world's highest active volcano, a summit at an altitude of 6,639 meters. On their way here, professional mountain explorers had to endure extreme cold, dropping to 40 degrees Celsius and gale-force winds of 112 kilometers per hour. It took them a month to reach the summit. Throughout the journey, they nearly gave up many times and almost failed to reach the top, proving that this mountain is not easy to climb at all. So how did this young girl get here? And what's even stranger is that after climbing to the top, she meticulously adorned herself. Who did she adorn herself for? And who was she? How old was she? Why did she die on such a cold mountain top? Today we will explore the mystery of the Yuyayako maiden. Her heart even still contained frozen blood. Therefore, by using modern techniques like DNA testing, we can study her internal organs, body fluids, and even the food she ate before her death. This way, we can uncover every mystery about her. The most astonishing thing is that the objects found around the girl look as if they were just created. There were ceramics, seashells, and items made of gold and silver, as well as human figurines and bundles of intricately woven fabrics. They all shared two common characteristics. First, they were very new and vibrant in color, and second, they all evoked an ancient civilization that had long vanished, the Inca Empire. A power that once dominated Western South America, it completely disappeared after the Spanish invasion, leaving behind a series of unsolved mysteries. This girl came from that mysterious land. It is truly a unique connection, as we are now able to get this close to the Inca people from over 500 years ago. Now let's briefly travel back in time to look at the Inca Empire where the girl lived. The Inca Empire existed long before Columbus discovered the New World. It was born in the 13th century in the area around present-day Cusco, Peru. They then settled in Cusco, and by 1438 developed into the Inca Empire. Archaeologists believe that the city of Machu Picchu, a former Inca stronghold, now considered one of the 7 wonders of the world, was built during this period. One of the most unfortunate things is that the Incas did not have a written language. Instead, they recorded events by painting on vases and cups and tying knots on multicolored ropes. We can understand this as the Incas' historical records. However, this method of recording events with knotted ropes has long been lost. To this day, no one can fully understand its meaning. Therefore, to solve the mystery of the girl, we must start with the small, strange objects around her. For example, this cloth, with its pattern, was wrapped over the girl's right shoulder. These patterns indicate that its owner was a man, and moreover, this man had a direct blood relationship with the Inca king. It's a symbol representing a direct male lineage. Therefore, historians believe that this cloth belonged to her father. From this, we can deduce that the girl was likely of noble descent. And there is still another piece of evidence that shows her noble background. We can clearly see that the left side of her face is bulging as if she is holding something in her mouth. Indeed, there was something in the girl's mouth. Some might guess it was some kind of treasure, like a pearl or a precious gem, but no, it was just coca leaves. Coca leaves are a snack for locals in South America today. Locals believe chewing coca leaves can help clear the mind, while ancient Andean people considered it a kind of sacred medicine, as it can reduce pain. Therefore, Chewing coca leaves has long been a privilege of the royal family, and it was not until after the 16th century that it became common among the people. From this, we can deduce that the girl definitely came from a noble background and was chewing coca leaves before her death. This is because coca leaves not only help with cold and altitude sickness, but also have a narcotic effect. In addition, before she died, the girl also drank a lot of a beverage called chicha. Chicha is a type of alcohol brewed from various local corns, and the way it's made is even more fascinating. The ancient Inca method for brewing chicha involved virgins chewing corn in their mouths. This is because saliva contains a type of amylase enzyme that breaks down starch, which is used to ferment the corn. After thorough chewing, the virgins would spit the corn mixed with saliva into containers used for fermenting the alcohol. This mixture would then be left to brew for a while, resulting in chicha. It can be said that the corn chewed by the maidens served as a kind of yeast in the brewing process. To this day, this type of alcohol, also known as chewed alcohol, still exists in some countries. According to Inca beliefs, corn was considered the embodiment of the goddess. Therefore, chicha made from corn was the embodiment of the goddess, and brewed with the yeast of pure virgins, it held an extremely sacred position. In ancient Inca times, chicha was not a common drink. It was mainly made for worshipping the gods and was only used on such occasions. For example, in the ancient Inca Empire, before a human sacrifice, the remains of the chicha had to be smeared on the body of the sacrifice, and then they had to use a tube to make the sacrifice drink more chicha. Next to the girl was an extremely precious object, a crown made of white feathers. This crown clearly points to another identity of the girl. The girl was a sacred maiden of the sun. Maidens of the sun were virgins that the Inca Empire dedicated as wives for the sun god. Every November, the Inca Empire held a selection of virgins. The first condition for being chosen was to be a virgin. Therefore, when they participated in the selection around the age of 8, they had to maintain their purity. After being chosen, they had to leave their homes and live in a designated palace called Aliawashi, which means Palace of the Chosen Ones. We translate it as Palace of the Sun Maidens. However, it was not as sacred as its name suggests. In reality, it was more like an academy for training virgins. For example, they were trained in religious rituals, traditional Inca beliefs, and of course, they were especially trained to be skilled in weaving fabric and brewing chicha. But no matter what, any girl chosen as a virgin was certain to bring honor to her family or practical benefits on a whole new level. So even though we don't know the girl's original family background, we do know that she moved to the Palace of the Sun Maidens around the age of 8. Now let's go back in time to see what the girl went through. Most of the girls chosen came from a relatively high social class, such as the daughters of nobles or local leaders. However, if a girl was extremely beautiful or had special talents, she would be chosen even if she came from a commoner family. The most outstanding noble girls among them would be sent to the Palace of the Sun Maidens in the capital, Cusco. The girls would be selected again in another round. Therefore, the Palace of the Sun Maidens in Cusco was the girl's final residence. Let's see what the girl's daily life was like. The girl lived in the Palace of the Sun Maidens, which was built with large stone blocks. It was as luxuriously decorated as the palaces and temples of the Inca kings, extremely vast. It was surrounded by walls, so the outside world could not see inside the palace, and conversely, the virgins inside the palace could not see the outside world. Not to mention seeing men and women outside. This is because the guards in the palace were very strict. At each entrance of the palace, there were about 20 men standing guard. All of them were eunuchs, and even as eunuchs, they were not allowed to enter the palace. According to the book Commentaries on the Royal Incas by Garcilaso, when the Spanish colonists entered Inca territory, they came across the bodies of 3 men who had been executed and hung upside down for trying to break into the Palace of the Sun Maidens. Therefore, only women were allowed inside the palace. Inside the palace, there was a narrow walkway, just wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. This walkway ran throughout the entire palace, and there were many rooms on both sides, which were used as workplaces in the palace. There were adult women in the palace called Mama Kona. They taught the virgins religious rituals and handicrafts, such as weaving fabric and brewing chicha. The virgins both learned and created these products. Therefore, we can see that they were more like workers in a factory. And moreover, this factory had a quite large scale. Typically, there were 1,500 virgins or more. They were divided into several classes based on their background and appearance. When they reached the age of 13 to 15, the most outstanding ones would be sent out. For example, the most beautiful ones with noble backgrounds would be chosen by the Inca king as his concubines, while those with lower status would be granted to Inca nobles or would remain in the Virgin Palace until the end of their lives. Among all the virgins, this girl had the highest rank. This pure white feather crown is proof of that. It symbolizes another important identity of the girl. She was a priestess of the noble sun god. That's right. Around the age of 13 or 14, the girl was chosen again. From then on, she received special education, and in the near future, she would go to the place closest to the sun in the territory of the Inca Empire, which is also where we discovered her, the summit of the Uyayaco volcano. The girl had to go there to worship the sun god. There, an extremely important religious ceremony would take place, where the girl was considered a goddess who received the highest honor because she was the center of this ritual. The only thing was that she was not the one offering a gift, but she was the gift herself. The Incas had an ancient custom of human sacrifice called capacocha. This was a great religious ceremony offered to the gods. It was performed during or after important events occurred, such as the death of a king, a war, or a natural disaster in the country. The purpose of the sacrifice ceremony was to ask the gods for protection or to express gratitude to them. However, according to the traditional beliefs of the Incas, this was not called a sacrifice. They believed that those who were sacrificed did not die. They remained on the mountaintops to protect the land with the gods. Therefore, the Incas considered sacrificial death a great honor, and this honor was passed down to children, because children were considered the purest beings. In fact, archaeologists have discovered many mummies of children who were sacrificed in the Inca regions of South America. They were selected from all over the Inca Empire. The selection criteria were that they had to be healthy, beautiful, and have no physical defects, for example, no scars on their skin. The children who were chosen were usually the descendants of nobles or local rulers. They were considered sacred, bringing energy and vitality to the people and the Inca Empire. After being selected, they were brought to the capital, Cusco. Here they would undergo an important purification ritual. Then they were taken to high mountains throughout the Inca Empire to be sacrificed. The girl was the same. She carried the sacred mission of the Inca Empire and began the journey of sacrifice, going to the end of her life. A group of people escorted her on foot from Cusco, crossing deserts all the way to the summit of the Uyayaco volcano. Because this was the place closest to the sun, and the sun god was the supreme god of the Incas, the young girl, as a priestess of the sun god, would sacrifice her life for this magnificent religious ceremony. And everything had already been arranged. The path to the place of sacrifice was over 500 kilometers long and took a year to complete. This journey was accompanied by local festivals and a series of religious activities such as singing, dancing, and drinking chicha. And the young girl was not the only sacrifice at the ceremony. At that time, she was accompanied by 2 other children. That's right. Archaeologists at the time discovered 3 mummies on the summit of Uyayaco. They were buried in separate round stone tombs, about 1.5 meters deep underground. The girl was the oldest at about 15 years old. The 2 other mummies were a boy and a girl, about 6 and 7 years old. DNA analysis shows that these 2 mummies were related, and most likely came from the same family. In addition, they also had a common characteristic, a rather long skull. The boy's mummy was the only one wrapped in a fetal position. The boy was about 7 years old and wore a reddish-brown cloak facing the sunrise. His head was wrapped in white feathers and a long rope made of sheep's wool. This long rope was often used during rain-praying ceremonies. People considered it a sling to throw stones into the lake to make it rain sooner. As for the other girl, about 6 years old, her head was tilted up towards the southwest. At some point centuries ago, she was struck by lightning. The lightning bolt burned the blanket wrapped tightly around her, as well as her cheek, ear, and shoulder. Because of this, she was also given the name Lightning Girl. Therefore, based on their identity, condition, location of discovery, and the objects buried with them, archaeologists believe that this was a sacrifice ceremony unprecedented in history, and it shocked the entire Inca Empire. But how did this ceremony take place, and what was the cause of their death? Based on a DNA analysis of their hair, the girl's diet changed drastically in the 12 months before she was sacrificed. She began to eat corn and meat, which were very valuable foods at that time, whereas before that, her main diet was only vegetables and potatoes. His long and arduous journey of sacrifice lasted about a year. The time was also precisely calculated beforehand. We cannot imagine the state of mind of the people on that journey. Perhaps the coca leaves and chicha helped to reduce fatigue and symptoms of altitude sickness, helping them complete their mission better, because it is said that the Incas believed the mood of the person being sacrificed had to be ensured to be happy throughout the ceremony. From the many sacrificed mummies that have been discovered, archaeologists believe that in these types of sacrifice ceremonies, it was often impossible to maintain a cheerful mood. However, the rituals had to take place, so once an unexpected event occurred, extreme measures had to be used on the person being sacrificed. However, in this case, the girl had no injuries. Having said that, it is now time for us to solve the final riddle on the girl. How did the girl live her final moments? It was December 21st, the time when the sun shines directly on the Tropic of Capricorn. On this day, the daytime in the northern hemisphere becomes shorter and the night longer. He-girl's father accompanied her through this final ceremony. He was not allowed to show reluctance or sadness because that would be a sin. The Incas considered this a happy moment because the girl was about to become a god, an immortal virgin chosen by the heavens. The priests carefully braided her hair and painted ancient red patterns on her face, trying their best to hide her exhaustion and fatigue after a year-long arduous journey, with elaborate costumes and careful makeup. As soon as the sun rose, the most important ceremony began. Offerings to the sun god were lit. The girl was given sacred chicha to drink. The Incas believed that after the soul leaves the body, it will cross the lake of life, and the sacred coca leaves can energize the soul. So the girl began to chew coca leaves. The combination of these two sacred substances created a kind of double anesthetic, which was what the girl needed most at that moment. However, when she sat in the stone tomb where she would be buried, facing death directly, she could not help but feel afraid, so she vomited. Finally, the bone-chilling cold and the increasingly thin air forced the girl to complete her mission. The cold on the mountaintop and the stable high humidity preserved her intact for 500 years. That is why we can see the mysterious Yuyayako girl today. The Incas believed that after being sacrificed, the soul of the Sun Maiden would return to the side of the sun god, becoming a sacred being that would forever protect them. At that distance,